plenaries, asynchronous and synchronous work, and time with your coaches has been focused on students' end goal of careers. Our next institute, which will come next semester, will be looking at the students' other end goals, which is transfer. So just before we launch into this closing plenary, I would like to share my gratitude and thanks to a few groups. And so we'll start with, if you would advance the slide for me, please, a set of funders that make all of this possible. So you know that this is a 5-year commitment that our state has made to scaling up guided pathways. And we have many funders, some that are even on the line today, who have made it possible for your institutions, your teams to come together when we can come together to pay for our events. And so we're very thankful to all of these different foundations that have made all of this possible. But I'd also like to thank my wonderful Texas Success Center team, who had done so much work to make this a meaningful event for you. To move from face-to-face to a remote event has been a learning curve for all of us. And so I very much appreciate particularly Dr. Christy Short's leadership with this, but the full Texas Success Center team, who you know because you've interacted with them, care a lot about your schools and helping you make this all happen. So thank you so much, team. Appreciate you. And my last thanks goes to the Aspen Institute. Have been such fabulous partners with us, helping to create the curriculum, to get the speakers ready, to make all of this event happen, and to make sure that it is meaningful and relevant to your teams. And so a big thank you to the Aspen Institute, Josh and Millicent in particular, but also to Ascendium, who is funding their work with us. So with those thanks behind us, then I want to jump into our closing plenary. So you know from coming to these events that our closing plenary always centers around definitely our model, but around hope and around urgency. And so for framing that, I just very quickly want to share urgency and then a bit about hope. So you know that our communities are relying on us, even before the pandemic, very much relying on us to bring and to be there for them. We know that in Texas, the unemployment rates are so high, and that our businesses and people in our communities have been hit. So no better time to talk about urgency, but also following that up with hope, that the dedication of our colleges to this systemic reform and the opportunities for social mobility are making a difference. And so I shared a bit of the data on our first opening plenary about how your KPIs are moving because you are scaling your guided pathways work, and we'll continue to bring that data to you. So about urgency and hope, then I'm going to introduce our Dr. Russell Lowry Hart, who's going to introduce our speaker for today. So Russell, please.
Glad to be here. So thankful for the Texas Success Center and the amazing work you've done to pull this together in a virtual environment. You should be really proud of your work, and I wanted to congratulate you publicly and thank everyone for joining us. We have an opportunity this afternoon to learn from a really remarkable and special soul. I get the pleasure of introducing Michael Collins to you. He's the vice president at JFF, Jobs for the Future, which is, as many of you know, a national nonprofit working to transform our nation's education and workforce systems to accelerate economic advancement for all, something that we're all committed to. He serves on JFF's executive team and provides leadership for JFF programs with an emphasis on equity and opportunity for social and economic mobility. One of the reasons that we love Michael is prior to joining JFF, he served as an assistant commissioner for participation and success at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And then he left us, so we're kind of trying to work through our grief and upset at you, Michael, for that. But his work at JFF has been transformative for our country and for our state. And we're just really honored to have him. He moved to Ohio, where he lives with his wife, Dana, and his 9-year-old son, Dashiell, and their beautiful, beloved chocolate labradoodle named Nova. So we appreciate you stepping away from those 3 lovely souls, Michael, and joining us today. And we look forward to learning from you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, so it's terrific to be here. I'm trying to figure out the slides. Christy, are you helping me with the slides or am I moving them? I can't hear anything. Let's see. There we go. It's terrific to be here. Thank you so much, Russell, for that introduction. And you know, I am a Texan, and I have been away for a while, and it's really been terrific to stay connected to the state through the work that I've been doing with JFF across the country. So today I wanted to talk to you about something I've been thinking quite a bit about, and it really is, you know, kind of interrogating kind of why we are where we are in the completion agenda, you know, why we are seeing some of the results that we're seeing. And I think that it's no surprise that we are, as a nation, you know, grappling with really some significant challenges. And I just wanted to meditate on that for a little bit and draw out some implications, I think, for our work. So as I've considered the work that we've done in post-secondary reform over the last really 2 decades, I've asked myself over and over why we don't have better results than what we have, particularly for people who are the most vulnerable in our economy, the ones we say who need higher education the most. And as you know, there's a debate happening right now in our country around kind of the value of college and whether or not, you know, college is worth it. And I have to be honest, I've begun to interrogate kind of the premise of college and or at least how we've characterized college. And I've begun to ask myself, you know, if it actually does, you know, what we say it does, given the results that that we're seeing for people who are, again, the most vulnerable. We'll go to the next slide. So after thinking deeply, one more slide, there you go, you got it right there. So after thinking deeply about this for a long time, I think that the story that we tell ourselves about college as a strategy for economic mobility, that you go to college, you get a job, you climb the income ladder, it's not quite true. So we can go to the next slide. So the prevailing narrative on how you get ahead and how you make it, I think, in this country is tightly associated with college. And I call this the college mobility narrative. But I think that elements of the narrative break down and it doesn't quite add up as true. Now, I believe that we can make it true with greater transparency about some of the elements of the narrative or elements of the story that have been left out. So this narrative, I think, you know, that you go to college, you know, you get a job and that you climb the income ladder is deeply embedded in the American ethos. It's deeply embedded in our culture. You know, college in many ways is seen as a rung on the ladder to the American dream, you know, that younger generations will do better than the older generations and that social and economic mobility are available to people who are willing to put in the work. And I can't help but notice that the mobility narrative is very similar to the kind of the economic uplift stories you know, that were popularized in the 20th century by Horatio Alger. So Alger was a novelist and he wrote these kind of dime store novels that depicted, you know, kind of these young, typically men that would, you know, boys that would rise to middle-class respectability and sometimes even riches, right, through hard work and good character, you know, cheerfulness. And these formulaic rags to riches stories, you know, might be easily dismissed today, but at the time, they found a rapt audience. Like, so people were very hungry for kind of a story about how you make it. You know, there was a time in the economy where there was great wealth being generated by the robber barons, and people were looking for kind of something to believe about how to make it. He was one of the most influential, socially influential kind of novelists of his time. He sold over 20 million books. So people were really looking for something to believe. And so when we think about kind of college as a strategy for upward economic mobility, I think about kind of the similarities, the kind of the undertones of this kind of Horatio Alger uplift, kind of our notions of kind of the American dream. And I have to say that there's an element of magical thinking about it, but many of us still believe it. Like, I know I believed it. I dedicated my life to it. And I think on some level, we all believe it, right? And the stories we tell ourselves are very powerful, right? They captivate our conscience, our subconscious. We want something to believe. So as I've worked in higher education reform, I think that there's new data that actually confirms my belief that the commonly characterized notion of college, in fact, is a myth. But with all myths, I mean, there's some elements of truth. And I think, to get to the truth, we have to bust the myth. But before we can bust the myth, do any meaningful myth busting, we need to interrogate why we believe the myth in the first place. Next slide, please. So as I thought about kind of why we believe in kind of the traditional notion of college so much, I thought about how it's deeply tied to how we think about how you make it in this economy. And I think that part of it is fueled by our notion of what our most elite colleges in the country do, right? There's almost a universally positive association between kind of our most elite institutions and, kind of mobility and prosperity. These are seen as tickets to the American dream, right? We all hold an image of what these, institutions look like. And in some ways, they are the archetypes, right, of how we think about college, even though we know that this is not college, for the majority of Americans, we still think about that red brick, the well-manicured lawns, and the privilege. And these institutions have influenced our perception of what college does. It has influenced our perception of what college can do. Let's go to the next slide. But they're also powerful signals from our federal policies. So both policies and policy statements. And so as I think about kind of some of the signals that we have as college as the primary strategy for economic mobility, I think about kind of the GI Bill. So the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. So we know it as the GI Bill. It helped millions of returning veterans go to college. It provided support for tuition fees. It provided support for even living stipends. There were, as part of the package, there was even mortgage support. There was even support for the veterans to start businesses. So huge investment. And this investment, this federal investment in college as a strategy for economic mobility, was considered an amazing success. And it is, the GI Bill is often cited as a major factor for the explosive growth of the American middle class. Similarly, and germane to kind of the work that we all do, the Truman Commission in 47, there was a sweeping vision to expand community college across the country to make it available, to a broader swath of the population, a more diverse swath of the population. And the thinking was that like over half the population could benefit from earning kind of associate's degrees that would allow them to enter vocations in their, people to enter vocations in their respective communities. And in some ways, this expansion, in some ways, it absolutely happened. And another kind of signal of the college as a mobility strategy is the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, so HEA, which provided, kind of Pell Grants, which at the time, at the height of their buying power in the mid 70s, actually paid for 3/4 of college. And so these are all powerful signals that college is a strategy for economic mobility. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, those of us who are here today, community colleges, often characterized as engines of economic mobility. Community colleges are central to the college mobility story, this narrative that, particularly for people from low-income backgrounds or community of color, you go to college and you have upward mobility. So as I said before, I believe it. I believe many of us on the panel or the the Zoom Today Believe It, and we've worked together on it, for the last 15 years, starting with the Achieving the Dream initiative and the subsequent community college completion initiatives, where we stacked lessons and evidence, cumulative evidence that actually informs the pathways work that we're implementing today. And so, collectively, the combination, these investments and the combination from state and federal investments amount to billions of dollars, strong signals of the belief in the mobility narrative. So if I think about kind of the aura of elite institutions, the GI Bill, Truman Commission, HEA, community college reform, these are all strong signals, that suggest that college is a strategy for economic mobility. So this is a powerful narrative, but I believe that there are some critical parts of this narrative that have been left out. And I think that I've come to believe that it is these things that have been left out that hamper our efforts for equity. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what's missing from the narrative? So if you include socioeconomic status and race, if you inject that into the college mobility narrative, it begins to break down. The narrative begins to break down, especially if you interrogate that narrative through the lens of someone who shares my heritage. So if you're a Black American, that narrative does not add up. So the social and economic uplift stories, the Horatio Alger perseverance, through hard work and cheerfulness. I mean, in some ways, we can dismiss that out of hand, right? Like that element, those people, the protagonists in those books were, they were white males, and their, race did not get in the way of their improbable climb, from rags to riches. If we think about kind of our nation's most elite institutions, the reference for those institutions is well-founded, right? So like graduation rates and income of people who go to those institutions are stellar. But the reality is that students who attend our nation's most selective colleges are 77 times more likely to be from families from the top 1% of income. And while we see every fall kind of the media coverage of the low-income student or student of color who has been admitted to one or more, or I've even seen all of the Ivies, these kind of one-off feel-good stories keep the kind of college mobility narrative alive. The exception becomes the rule. The truth is less than 4% of students from families in the bottom fifth of income actually attend an Ivy League institution. So this is hardly attainable. It's hardly a scalable strategy for the vast majority of low-income students and students of color. Next slide, please. So let's go back and interrogate the big kind of federal signals around this mobility story. So the GI Bill unquestionably helped millions of Americans go to college, and it accelerated their path to the American dream, no question. But the benefits of the GI Bill were not distributed equitably. So most of those benefits, the vast majority of those benefits went to white men, white returning veterans. So this was it was federal legislation. There wasn't language that prohibited Black Americans from benefiting, but Southern politicians negotiated that the benefits be managed locally, and they used local policy apparatus to ensure that Black returning veterans were not able to access the benefits, or those that were able to access it at a much smaller rate. So the story we tell ourselves there about kind of college as a strategy for economic mobility certainly does not hold up for this particular population. So if you go to the Truman Commission, while community colleges absolutely have expanded, this was not, again, Truman Commission was a policy statement, it wasn't legislation, but in many ways, community colleges did proliferate throughout the country. And so while that vision was realized, the assumption from the commission was that the people, the broader swath of the population that went to these institutions would actually complete their studies and their credentials. And we know from the work that we're doing today that we're still working on that, right? So that piece of the narrative we have yet to live into, and in some ways, that is what our reform efforts are all about. And then the Higher Education Act, the buying power of the Pell Grant has gone from kind of 3/4 of college costs to about 30% of college costs. And so when you look at these signals and you look at the elements that have been left out, the narrative, the college mobility narrative, loses a little bit of its luster. But let's continue. And so the next slide. So we need to have a maybe a difficult conversation. You know, when we think about the college mobility narrative, and one of the challenges that we've struggled with regard to our equity measures, we've really struggled, and I've struggled right alongside with you in this reform work to create the outcomes for Black learners and workers that we hope to have. So what is the mobility narrative? What does this mean for, you know, how we're talking about our work today? What story are we telling ourselves today about the role of college and economic mobility? So today, the mobility narrative meets the coronavirus, right? It meets the racial tension that has put an uncomfortable spotlight on systemic inequality and frankly, evidence of racism that is built into the structure and foundations of a lot of American institutions. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like. But I think that, you know, we have a moment to do something different. And there's something about the combination of the nation being in lockdown and watching the viral videos of the, you know, horrific murder of George Floyd and the calculated and callous wielding of race as a tool for personal advantage by the white woman who accused a Black man, who turns out to be a Harvard-educated bird watcher, of threatening her life. I mean, in some ways, we have witnessed kind of the two poles of kind of barbarity of racism and also the casual use of racism for personal advantage. And it is created and contributed to kind of the mass protests that we see and the tension underlying so many of our discussions in the public discourse. And so, you know, I think that as we think about the college mobility narrative, it's really difficult to leave that element out. So let's take a look at what happens when we inject it. So if you think about outcomes and economic value of credentials, who you are matters, right? People from higher income backgrounds they're more likely to go to college, they're more likely to earn a degree, their degrees are worth more, right? They're more likely to attend selective colleges, they're more likely to have social capital that gives them access to employment networks. And you know, it should not be surprising that the majority of people, you know, kind of in this population are more likely to be white, and they are more likely to be the beneficiaries of forebearers, right, who have had the benefit of the GI Bill, the mortgage supports, and other subsidies that were not available to Black Americans. And race matters, right? So Blacks, for a host of reasons, Black Americans are less likely to attend college. They're less likely to earn a credential. And when they do, they are more likely to earn less at every level of education attainment for every type of credential. So these outcomes do not support the mobility narrative, and they're clearly incongruent with the mobility narrative, but they also suggest something structural here, right? Like, we're having a debate in the country about whether or not structural racism exists. There's something structural that is happening with this population. So let's look at some broader context. And I need to speed up here because we're going to run out of time. So overall, Black Americans are less likely to climb the income ladder. If you're Black and you're born into a family in the bottom fifth of income, you are more likely to stay there. Over half of Black Americans born into the bottom fifth of income remain there as an adult. Next slide, please. So this next slide is difficult to read, but the point of it is I'm showing here, you know, Black Americans have turned to higher education to improve their prospects for earnings and employment. And we can see that they are enrolling, you know, in community college. The upper box there on the left shows, you know, kind of a significant enrollment from 2000 to 2010. Of course, the numbers are coming down a little bit because of the coronavirus, but they definitely had increased enrollment. you can see that unfortunately, graduation rates are lower, that 13% there, and as well as earnings, the median annual income earnings are lower. And while I've just included the Black-white gap here, these outcomes, Black Americans are at the bottom of all racial categories for each of these outcomes. And so again, I'm showing this to reflect that our challenge here is structural. So next slide, please. So we say that, we are going to disrupt these outcomes. Community colleges, are instrumental, and I believe they are. But when we look at where these students are studying, we see that they are disproportionately in the credential pathways that lead to lower wage work. And we know from the Center for Education and Workforce that Black Americans are more likely to be concentrated in programs of study that lead to lower wages. They're less likely, they're underrepresented in the STEM-related fields. So as you're thinking about kind of which pathways students are in, if you look at this slide, many of the Black Americans who are, the learners who are in our institutions are really kind of in some of the pathways that lead to lower wage work. Next slide, please. So again, these issues are structural. There's strong evidence that there is discrimination in the labor market. In their article, are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal for the National Bureau of Economic Research? Researchers conducting resume and callback studies found that job applicants with white-sounding names received 50% more callbacks than applicants with names more associated with African Americans. And we see, as I just said earlier, the earnings for African Americans who earn credentials are lower in comparison to other groups across all degrees. Next slide, please. So here we are with COVID. People are using COVID as if it is kind of the start of kind of challenges around equity for this population. But the reality is that the unemployment rate, despite the growth of Black Americans earning credentials, 2- and 4-year credentials, the Black unemployment rate has been double the white unemployment rate for over 50 years. So next slide. And so this is a sad slide, but again, to make the case that this is structural, Black people who actually make it to the middle class are more likely to see their children actually go down the income ladder. Their children are downwardly mobile. 7 out of 10 Black Americans born into the middle income quintile fall 1 or 2 quintiles below as adults. Again, these issues are structural. So let's turn to possible solutions. Next slide, please. So I don't have an answer to the challenge of structural racism, but I believe that we can make the college mobility narrative more true by being more direct and lifting up kind of the connection between our post-secondary reform efforts and the labor market. So historically, community college completion reform, in my experience, has been focused on the supply side, kind of what the colleges are producing. And I believe that, our efforts have been largely silent, like on the ways that race, influences institutional outcomes and how race impacts transitions to the labor market. And I think that to fill in some of the missing pieces of the narrative, we need to be more explicit about the role that race plays and more responsive to the labor market realities that students face as they try to reach their employment goals. So one of the things I think that can be done to fill in some of the missing elements of the mobility narrative is to be transparent. We need to be transparent with race and include it as a variable, right? As opposed to presenting kind of a college mobility strategy as a race neutral strategy. And so one way to do that, I believe, next slide please, is to make work more central to the post-secondary experience. My colleague Nancy Hoffman and I wrote, co-edited a book. It's called Teaching Students About the World of Work. And we believe that if in post-secondary, we put work more centrally in community college reform, we can make inroads around including some of the elements that have been missing to the mobility story that can help, kind of low-income students and students of color. And so specifically, we believe that it's really important for us to be explicit about the world of work and what students will encounter when they transition from college to work. So that includes information, again, on the labor market returns that they can expect. It also includes information and transparency on some of the structural issues that they will face as they transition to the labor market. So this includes not only labor market returns, but documented racial and gender dynamics associated with different kinds of work. It also includes the importance of developing social capital, which in shorthand are relationships that can give them a leg up for information and connections to employers or people who have information about employers. Social capital is not an element of the mobility narrative that we are explicit about. It's implicit, it's necessary, but we don't talk about it. We need to fill in that missing piece of the narrative. So this is not to reduce the post-secondary experience to a job. It's more making the implicit explicit, right? So I want to move us on, but there are a number of ways that you can do this. So we talk about in the book apprenticeships, different work-based learning strategies, internships, and there are also course-based approaches. And there's one approach that's really promising. You might know about the Ethnographies of Work course at Gutman Community College. And this is a course where students, most of them, it's a CUNY college in New York, most of the students are Black and Latinx and from low-income backgrounds. They're trained in ethnographic methods, and they're sent out into they're placed in jobs where they interview and they use ethnographic methods to document, kind of what it's like to work in those fields. And they come back with deep insights on work norms, communication patterns, and it gives them deep insight as to some of the things that they will need to navigate. Again, making some of these issues explicit. So there's a quote I'd like to share from one of the students over the focus group. And this student who did ethnographies of work talked about her experience. And so she said, one thing I learned at Gutman is that our careers are created and built. It's not just that you learn a set of skills, you just get a degree and you get a job and apply it. It's not given to you that way. So I learned more of career dynamics and how we're always learning and navigating through different stages. It's not as clear cut as learning how to do one thing. You get a specific task and you do it, right? So this student is, through this work experience, is really gaining knowledge and information that can help her navigate what is a complex transition from college to work. So let's go to the next slide, please. Here we go. So the college mobility narrative was problematic on its own, but again, now COVID is in the mix and we have kind of additional complications. So again, like, what is the story we're telling ourselves about college as a strategy to economic mobility? So are our interventions, are our guided pathways work, are they relevant to what low-income students, students of color are experiencing today? So next slide, please. And let's skip that one. Let's go to the next one. So I want to talk about some things that we need to do to complete the narrative. So I think that as we think about including elements that have been missing, transparency on elements that have been left out of the mobility narrative, like probability of completion of a program of study, transparency on earnings, economic value of credentials, data on employment prospects by race, ethnicity, and gender, and the importance of social capital. Including these in kind of our work will require kind of a next generation equity-centered counseling, advising, and career navigation support, right? I don't believe this exists yet, but I believe that it can be done. And I think that it's really important that we do this in a way that increases learners' knowledge and confidence, as they successfully, embark on and complete credential pathways that have economic value, while at the same time, the strategy is transparent and strategic about the barriers that must be navigated to for that student to end up with a success and for that mobility narrative to be true for that student. So let's go to the next slide. So with regard to hope and urgency, there are some things that we can do, I believe, to make our work, the college mobility narrative, meaningful and real in this time of economic uncertainty and volatility. I won't go deep into these, but they are some things I think that we can all do and embed into kind of our pathways work. So one, I think that our pathways work needs to address the needs for immediate employment. So we had huge spike in unemployment going from full employment to high levels of unemployment. And I believe that there were many people who might have been on post-secondary pathways that were out of work, right? So initially, I think it's really important to get people into what Burning Glass calls lifeboat jobs. But then secondly, I think that we have to help those learners upskill to better jobs. So if you get somebody in a lifeboat job, how is that job connected to some of our longer term pathways, right? How are skilling opportunities connected to some of our longer term pathways? Have we had that conversation, in our institutions? I think that we need to improve access to pathways with demonstrated economic value. We talked about that. There's work to do there. And we also need to create an infrastructure for lifelong learning that links some of the short-term credentialing and skilling opportunities that people will need as of necessity from kind of the unemployment. How do we link those to our longer-term guided pathways work? We also need wraparound supports for the populations that we're serving. Many of you are working on those now, but more than ever, given the unemployment rate and the challenges that we're having, people will need those kinds of support. And finally, we absolutely, to make this narrative true and to include all of the missing variables to the mobility story, to the mobility narrative, we absolutely have to upgrade career navigation to help people manage the multiplicity of credential pathways and skilling options that are front and center. I believe that the great work that all of you are doing in your pathways can really help at a time in our country where we are really struggling to create equity. And I hope that some of this call to action and some of the thinking that we have to do to fill in the missing pieces of the mobility narrative to make it true, I hope that some of that resonates. And I'm out of time, so with that, I'm going to have to close. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of these thoughts with you. And I'll turn it back over to Christy and Cynthia.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. We do have a question, and we have a couple minutes. If other people have questions they'd like to submit in the chat, then please do go ahead and do that. So, Michael, let me ask you this question that has an example in with it. So how do we develop more funding and infrastructure to support intern-level opportunities to build social capital for future type jobs in wireless networking, organic electronics, and medical imaging at a 2-year institutional level? So how do we develop more funding and infrastructure to support intern-level opportunities to build social capital?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer. If I had the answer, everybody would have the funding to do this, right? So one of the things that I didn't have time to mention, as you go through the call to action, all of those things take resources, right? So in some ways, community colleges are what Pam Ettinger, who is the president of Bunker Hill Community College, she calls a double bind, right? Like you receive less resources to help students who have greater challenges, right? And so you have a bigger job to do and less work to do it. So advocating for financial resources to implement some of these strategies is absolutely critical. And so that work has to continue. I think that, you know, as I talked about the call to action, I hope that it can help us also prioritize some of the resources that we do have, or if there are forthcoming dollars from, you know, whether it's a stimulus or infrastructure package, you know, how do we use those resources strategically to do some of the things that, you know, kind of were embedded in the question. The last thing I'll say about the question is that while they gave program-specific examples, I really think that the volatility of the labor market and us trying to kind of see the future, I think is tricky. I think that, you know, IT, digital skills, you know, advanced manufacturing, there are many strategies, viable pathways that I think we need to be aware of. But given what happened with COVID and how in such a short time, the entire employment mix shifted, I would encourage us to also think about how we embed the skills, durable and portable skills across all kind of programs. So not just thinking about kind of technology, you know, IT, but digital skills really kind of across the curriculum, and ensuring also that we are preparing people for future disruptions, right? So where you might have been in a pathway, we have an economic disruption and you have to pivot, right? What are the adjacent programs? What are the adjacent skills that you have that might be relevant to a new area of employment that perhaps didn't exist? So I think that that's how I would answer that question. I really believe, and again, I was trying to have a, you know, kind of a thought, you know, kind of exercise here around us living into the college mobility narrative by kind of trying to get us to think about, you know, what's missing, and resources are definitely missing. So I don't want to suggest that, you know, that is not the case. So I appreciate that question.
Yep, thank you so much, Michael. And you all had Michael's contact information here. You'll see his email address and phone number should you want to reach out with additional questions or more information. And we will put links to some of the resources that he shared as well. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective and thoughts and energy with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys are doing amazing work, and I really hope to continue all the great reform efforts really on behalf of, I talked about Black Americans today, but on behalf of all students who struggle in our economy. I think that you're doing such important work, and thank you so much for the opportunity just to share a few thoughts.
We have one more portion of our institute. We're going to transition now to an action planning segment, and just a few more words before we get into action planning. So we've had a couple questions about how long our course will be open. The campus course for the institute will remain open indefinitely. So if you saw some videos that you wanted to revisit, or maybe you didn't have a chance to explore all those spotlight sessions, then you'll be able to get back in there, access the materials, and continue to return to the course, look at the discussion boards, and engage with the content into the future. And speaking of those spotlights, I do want to just say thank you again to our presenters who created the spotlight sessions. So our community colleges in Texas that contributed, Alamo, Amarillo, McLennan, San Jacinto, thank you so much for sharing your successes and lessons learned with the rest of the state, as well as our partners, Inside Track, Ivy Tech Community College, and JFF, which contributed both the spotlight sessions and our previous speaker. So thank you so much, JFF. I also want to thank some folks that Cynthia thanked earlier, but they've done such an instrumental job in getting this institute off the ground. I really want to recognize their contributions. So from the Aspen Institute, Millicent, Tess, Jaime, and Daniel, thank you for all of your work behind the scenes to make this happen. And from the Success Center and TAC, Johanna, Kara, and Noah have been great resources, and we couldn't have done this without you. So as we move into action planning for the rest of the time today, we ask that you, if you haven't yet, go ahead and review your responses on the Workforce Playbook assessment tool that you submitted in SurveyMonkey that has been downloaded and put into the files portion of your group space. And think about, as you look over, what your responses were before the Institute started, and consider what you've learned so far during the Institute. What practices do you now want to explore? Maybe that was something that you learned about over these past 3 weeks, something you read about or heard another college mentioning. So what do you want to explore now? And then what takeaways from the Institute do you want to share with your team and your action planning to inform what you put on that action planning document? And it is a new type of action plan now. So this is going to look different from the action plans that you have seen previously at Texas Pathways Institute. This is uploaded in your file section in your group space, and it is specific to your college. So I'll tell you just a little bit about this if you haven't had a chance to explore it yet. So this new action and assessment plan is designed to help you connect the actions that you take with the results that you see. So how does your strategy influence the resulting data from your actions? We'll continue to use this plan in future institutes, so it's not a one and done after this institute, come back to it at some point. We're going to continue to build off of this long-term plan for action and assessment over the next few years, with really a goal for continuous improvement, always thinking what is working, how can we tweak it to be even more successful moving forward. You'll see tabs here on the workbook. The first one is instructions, pretty lengthy and detailed instructions, but I would recommend reading those. I might answer a few of your questions. And then the action plan tab is what you will start working on now, and then that will be due on November 20th. You'll see a tab for definitions for key performance indicators. These are the same definitions that you saw the last time you received a KPI report, but they're repeated here for convenience. And then the latest KPI data, which have been updated with numbers from 2018 from the coordinating board. So as I mentioned, the data on your sheet are for your college. And then there's a tab for you to enter short or long-term measures that you also want to track as you look at the implementation of your action to achieve your goal. And there's an assessment and improvement tab for you to complete in the future. So do not worry about completing it this time. So the assessment and improvement tab is after you have implemented your actions. How are you measuring that? What does it look like? And then how are you going to continue to improve it? So you'll come back to that one 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So the only one that you need to worry about today is the action plan using some of the information that's included there in your key performance indicators. So I'm going to open up breakout rooms and put everyone into our breakout rooms now. You'll choose the room for your college. And if your coach is available today, I know we have a couple on Aspen visits, then your coach will come and join you in your rooms. So we do want to thank all of our Texas Pathways coaches for their work and their dedication with working with the teams over these past 3 weeks. It's really been quite an incredible effort from everyone involved. So I'm about to open up the breakout rooms. So please move into your room for your college and start digging into those action plans. Hi, everybody. It looks like some people are not seeing where to get to their breakout rooms. It could be related to which version of Zoom you're running. If you could please add the name of your college to your name, I can move you into the correct room. So if you could please add, ACC, MCC, I will go ahead and put you in the right room. So thank you for your patience.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Ted.
I don't see you. Who's speaking to me?
I should make you guess, Ted. I should make you guess. We spent so much time together. It's Tina.
Wait a minute. There you are, Tina.
Yes, and I don't see
Okay.
myself either. It's probably just the view I have. Oh, here we go.
I think it's just you and me, and I'm not sure how we got here.
No, no, you have to go to your gallery view or you have to change that somehow up there.
There's more
So
of a
Ted, this
Yeah,
Joe
y'all are
Fleischman, can you
still
hear
in
me?
the main room. So we're still sorting people into the breakout rooms. And so you're still in the main room right now. So if you could if you could choose, so hopefully you can see where you can choose your room, but if you don't, then please put the name of your college into, change your name to include the name of your college, and we will get you sorted there as soon as possible. Going down the list now.
Can you hear me? This is Joe Fleischman. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I hear you.
It's not taking my chat.
All you have to do to change your name on your picture is go up beside your video. There should be 3 little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your image. You
Okay.
3 little dots, it'll say rename, and you can type your name, the name of the college in it.
Oops.
Okay.
Okay, if you are still unassigned and in the main room here, let me know where you want to go. I think I've picked up everyone who had changed their name to include their college. So give me a shout out and let me know where you should go.
Christy, this is Pam at Hill College. I changed mine to, I renamed it, but nothing happened.
Okay,
Same here, very similar.
Same for Kay Eggleston, should be Dallas College.
And South Texas College, I was placed with a college that sounds similar or spelled similar, but not the right one.
Okay. Hang on just a second.
Hey, Christy, if you can hear me, can you move me into Central Texas? The college?
Yeah, I can hear you. And what I'm seeing in the breakout rooms unassigned does not match who's in the participants. And so, Millicent, if you have an idea how to make those lists match so that I can then move them, I welcome your suggestions.
Do not know.
It's Teresa who's still in the main room. Is this Teresa Brooks or Teresa Chavez? Teresa, are you there? Okay. All right, I'm going to close down what I see for breakout rooms again and open it up, and maybe it'll put new people in there. But right now, I only see Teresa, Millicent, and the Success Center as unassigned. So let me see if I can make you all show up in that list.
Yeah, Kay Eggleston.
Yeah, you're not in my unassigned list, which is
yeah, they put me in the wrong college.
Reality.
It put me with
Okay,
North Texas, but I should be with Dallas College.
And you're not able to choose a different room for yourself?
Takes me back to North Texas.
And
Christy, this is Pam Bain at Hill College. I'm having the same problem.
Hi, Pam.
Okay.
How are you, Kay?
I'm good.
All right, so. Okay, you were with North Central and you needed to be with Dallas, is that
Yes.
right?
Thank you.
And I do not even see you as assigned to North Central here.
And Christy, this is Phyllis Deese
Yeah, hi.
from Texarkana College. Are you seeing me? I'm not assigned anywhere.
No, the only people I see as unassigned are Teresa, Millicent, and the Success Center. I don't even see how to, like, I see that you all are in here. I see that you're in the participant list, but I don't have you in the screen where I could put you in a room. So that it is very problematic. I don't really know a way around it. Okay, there's Teresa. Teresa, we're going to give it a go with you. Hang on a second. All right, hopefully we got Teresa in the right place.
I wonder if folks who aren't showing up, I wonder if you leave the meeting and come back, if that might generate, not sure, but just throwing out ideas.
We can try that, see if it'll work.
If you don't mind, that would be great.
So you want us to totally leave the Institute and come back in?
I think if you just try leaving, if you just leave the Zoom meeting, like just click leave at the bottom and leave the meeting and then try coming back in with the same link, we can see if that will work. That will
okay, we'll try.
Hey, Christy, it's Krista. I was wondering, I'm going to go back. Hi, can you send me to Cisco? I want to just make sure they're on target with opening it up. And I've already got Trinity Valley started, and I'll come back to them and later. So if you could send me to Cisco.
And you weren't able to choose a different room?
No, it's just sent me back to the main room.
Yeah, Christy, when I tried to go back into a breakout room, it's still showing me in Alvin only, and that's the only option I have. And I'm trying to do the same thing.
Okay, well, hang on. So it's got you in Alvin, Ted. Let me see. And you want,
I want to try
okay, where do you want to go? You want to go to Central?
Central Texas, please. And then I'm going to come back out of there in probably 10 minutes and try to get into Ranger or Panola. Okay.
Just give me a heads up. I went ahead and put you in, so you should be able to get to Central. And then, Krista, where were you and where do you want to be?
Yeah, I want to go to Cisco next. I may go back to Trinity Valley, but I'm worried that Cisco is going to be confused on some things. So I want to get there.
Okay. All right. There you go.
Hey, Christy.
Yeah?
It's Karen. How you doing?
Hey, Karen. Good.
So I think I'm supposed to be with MCC, but when I go in there, there's no one in the room. They left and I don't know where they went.
Okay.
I did want to tell you though that I did have the opportunity to observe Martha Ellis actually with Kilgore. So if we couldn't fix me up, I know these people are much more important to get them into rooms. And if we can't fix me up, it's not a problem because I did get to see one session. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like McLennan may have changed their plans and decided to meet at a different time. So I don't see that other folks from McLennan are meeting at this time.
Okay, then I'm right. I was in there alone. All right, well, that's like I said, it's not a problem because I already did get to observe. So I'm just going to go ahead and close out. And if you happen to hear from them and say, where did she go? You can at least know that I was trying. But it's okay. Okay.
Hey, Christy, I'm still here.
Thanks.
It didn't send me so.
Well, I see you in the Cisco list. It says Krista O'Neill not joined. So
let's see.
So Millicent, where should she look? Is there a place for the breakout
I see
dialogue where she should?
Let me try that. Okay, got it.
All right, Millicent, I think it's just us.
I wonder if everyone who logged out just didn't log back in.
Some people did, but some people, I still couldn't get them.
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't see how I can move anybody if they're not showing up in my unassigned list. And I don't Here's somebody coming back. Let's see. Hey, Bergval, which college are you with? That's Christina Bergval, College of the Mainland. And she's disappeared, I think. Yeah, so when I tested this, nobody had any problems. They picked their rooms. You know, I did it a couple different times, no problem. And then I don't know if so it could potentially be like a Zoom version issue, or maybe they didn't see where to click. What do you think it is?
I don't know, because it works fine for me. I think it's definitely one of those two. I wonder if that's, oh, there's somebody else.
So you weren't assigned, well, nobody was, but when I opened up the breakout rooms, was it just like you're invited to join a breakout room and then you pick?
There was just a little pop-up at the bottom of my screen that said join breakout room. When I clicked it, it pulled up the list of all of them.
Okay. So I guess it would help for me to have like more explicit instructions, like at the bottom of your screen, you will see, but.
Yeah, it does look different. Like it looked, and I don't know if it was because I'm a co-host or if it looks different for everybody, but it looked to me different than when like usually you get the invitation, you know, but that could be because I'm a co-host. I'm not sure. But it was like small.
Yeah, but
instead of it being that big window. So maybe people just didn't see it. I don't know. Do you want me to pause the recording?
Oh yeah, we could just stop it. I'll trim it way back. I always start